Okay, perfect. So we're live and recording, and I want to welcome a really good friend of mine who's joining us tonight, Kuzio. And Una is a lawyer, a real estate lawyer, and works with her own company, Touchstone Law Group in Kelowna. And she's here tonight to talk to us a little bit about her profession. As just before we get started, we do want to recognize that although we're virtual, we are doing this from traditional territories of the Inca, Kaplan, and Silk people. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And our first question for you tonight, Una, could you please just tell us a little bit about what it's like, your profession, being a lawyer?
For sure. I've got a bit of a unique experience in that I guess I got called to the bar in 2008. So over the last 13 years, I've worked in a few different environments. So as a lawyer, just out trying to market for clients versus working for one client. I've worked in a large firm, which had about 30 lawyers. I've worked in a really small firm, essentially just myself contracting. And then I've also worked in our current firm, which started out as myself, a partner, and one assistant. So as small as 3. And then now we're up to 3 lawyers and 11 staff. So we're about 14 or 15 people usually. So having been through a few different structures as far as the size and the dynamics of a firm that I've worked in, it's been a neat process to really see the differences and figure out which parts I liked of what I did and which parts I didn't like. So ultimately for me, that led to me starting my own firm because I do love business and love the business of law as well. So it's a nice way for me to be able to combine the practice of law, so the substantive side of what I do, while also getting to run a business and dealing with the marketing side and the HR side and just the general operations side of running a business, the same as everybody else would out there.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, I know that this is going to be a really big question, so feel free to tailor it to maybe more of what you do. But what are some of those just general duties that are associated with being a lawyer? What do lawyers do?
So in the big picture, there's a bit of a divide in lawyers. You'll often see the terms barristers and solicitors, sometimes just barristers, sometimes just solicitors. And that is a bit of a key division as far as the type of work that a lawyer would do. So when you come out of law school, at least for the Canadian provinces, the way that we all do, you are licensed to practice in any area of law that you want. But barristers typically are the ones that would do the more litigation, court related work. So if there's a lawsuit that somebody needs legal guidance on, they would do that type of work, make applications to court for approving actions and that type of thing. Solicitors on the other side is more my deal. I like to call, for the most part, ourselves happy lawyers because we're typically dealing with clients that are doing things like buying businesses, starting businesses, buying real estate, selling real estate, leasing real estate. So more sort of, I'm not going to say more paper driven per se, but definitely more on the sort of the making deals come together piece and actually executing those deals versus the court work, which often arises when there's a dispute over particular things. So that's a bit of a key divide as far as the two sort of types of lawyers out there. There's some lawyers that do both for sure. For the most part, lawyers seem to get drawn to one side or the other, either the sort of the litigious court route or more the sort of transactional work that I do on the solicitor side.
And
that's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer. I just wanted to interject a quick question based on that. On your side, the solicitor side, in terms of, so what function does a lawyer serve in a deal that's happening?
So it depends a little bit on the type of deal that you're doing. So I personally do a lot of real estate work. I also do corporate commercial work. So in real estate, if people are buying a house or selling a house or commercial property, you generally want to get a lawyer involved to help ensure you do your due diligence to make sure the property you're buying is actually what you're expecting it to be. You know what title looks like, so you know what actual asset you're getting. And then also dealing with the actual transfer of the asset. So if you're buying a house and you need to borrow money from the bank needs you to hire a lawyer to do the mortgage, to give you the money to be able to buy the house. So as a lawyer on the real estate side, we typically would get involved to do both some of that due diligence work with clients as they've got a contract in place, or sometimes drafting contracts for them. And then also the actual process of preparing all the documents that need to be signed by all of the relevant parties to actually transfer the property and registering that transfer of land. So the first few times you actually go on and transfer a property to somebody else, it's a little bit scary because you're hoping you did it the right one to the right person. But on the real estate side, that's residential real estate for sure. That's sort of the key role we would have. And then on the corporate commercial side, it depends on if it's somebody buying a business. Again, very similar to land, you'd want to go through that due diligence process, do all the investigation, review all the contracts that the business is a party to that you'd be taking over. And then also, of course, dealing with the paperwork side to actually transfer, whether it's assets or shares associated with the business being transferred. So that's in the big picture what our role would be in those areas. Also on the solicitor side, I don't do as much of it, but there's the wills and estate side. So if you're doing estate planning or somebody has passed away, you need to go through the estate administration process. A solicitor would typically do that work. So on that, we get involved on the estate planning side, take instructions from the clients, work through some planning with them, and then actually document those wishes. And then on the estate administration side, we would work with them through the process of applying to court. It's a bit different than the litigation process because it's not typically something, at least in the work that we do, that there's actually disputes over it. You just have to actually go through the formal process of getting court approval on things. So that would be our role on the estate side as well.
Really interesting. Just wondering, Una, if you can tell us, what does your typical workplace look like as a lawyer? I guess it depends again which side you're on, right? But maybe you can give us a little bit of an idea.
For sure. So in our office, for example, we've got just a typical office space in Kelowna with probably 10 or 11 support staff. So those would be people that help us kind of execute our files by doing document preparation and data entry and dealing with phone calls and that type of stuff. And then we have also a bit of an administrative department because, as you can imagine, if you're dealing with a lot of real estate, you have a lot of money moving through bank accounts, and that money is not our money. So we have in our office essentially one full-time person that does all accounting. So she does all of the work as far as funds coming into our accounts. We have bank accounts with probably 7 or 8 banks. So it's a lot of transactions on a daily basis. Some days we'll have 25 or 30 real estate deals closing. So there's money in and out all over the place on those. So we'd have somebody doing that type of a role. And then also just people general office help. So with the real estate side, we have a lot of money going back and forth to banks, and we need somebody to actually take that for us and make sure it gets processed properly and get the correct receipts for it and all that stuff too. So our workplace is very kind of your typical office structure as far as what it looks like for us. On the litigation side, similar, they'd have their sort of standard office with their assistant or multiple assistants that help them process their paperwork and their files, but then they'd also spend a chunk of their week most of the time going to the courthouse to make court applications. No longer going to the courthouse. I think they do a lot of those by phone, as I'm sure you guys have seen the cat Zoom video that the lawyers had come up on their it's shifted a bit that way, so that they're probably moving a bit more to a structure more like what we do, where you're actually for the most part in your office kind of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I'd say 9 to 5. Dave should know that I probably work more than that, but also there's been a lot more of a move to flexibility with the pandemic coming in and just people learning how to work a bit differently and work remotely. For the last 2.5 years, I've been living in Merritt and then working in Kelowna a couple of days a week. So I usually do 2 to 3 days a week that I work in Kelowna, and then 2 to 3 days a week that I work in Merritt. So I've been doing this flexible work kind of arrangement for a while because I've had to with my life. And so for me, I was a bit ahead of people, I think, on this. There's been definitely some challenges for some of the, I'm not going to say older practitioners, but the more senior practitioners that tend to rely really heavily on their staff for a lot more as far as document preparation, drafting emails, all that type of stuff. They've had to kind of jump in and figure some more of that stuff out, because you don't necessarily have somebody sitting right outside your office that can help you get all that stuff done that you used to do.
Great. Can you give me a few examples of what a day or a typical week on the job would look like for you?
For sure. So my days are probably not, there's not all that much variety to them. For example, today I worked in Merit today, so I went to the office about 8:30 after I dropped some kids at school, and between 8:30 and 2, I think I had 8 client meetings. So it was a bit of a busy day that way. So, and it's client meetings doing various things. So getting them to sign documents for real estate transactions, getting them to sign off on estate planning documents, just notarizing documents, or helping people with stuff they need to have signatures witnessed on. And then it can be a lot of time on the phone, particularly when I'm working remotely, just because often people think that's a time that I'm super accessible and available because I have nothing else to do but answer the phone on those days. But my Merit practice has picked up quite a bit. So lots of time on the phone, and tons and tons of email. I don't know how people practice law before email, but I know they did. I can only imagine the sort of the speed of how things moved back then versus what we work through now.
Yeah, and an email can sure eat up a lot of time. I know that from my personal experience in my work.
I know I was working all day today, and actually right before I came in here, I said every day at the end of the day I have to file away my emails. I can't stand having emails in my sent folders or my inbox. And I went into my sent folder from today. I had 143 emails that I had sent. So it's amazing how much time it does take up, but it's also amazing how quickly we can move through stuff now with email, and how much more efficiently you can get work done versus sending a letter and waiting 2 weeks for somebody to send a response. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah, you bet.
Sort of building maybe on that a little bit, could you tell us a little bit about some of the things you like the most about your job, and then maybe some things that if I'm a young person thinking about law, I would want to consider before I made that commitment?
Yeah, for sure. The easy one for me in terms of what I like about what I do, and it's come out of the way that I've actually ended up structuring my practice as far as running my own business, is I really enjoy the business side. So I like making decisions on what we should do for marketing and hiring and staffing and budgeting and all that type of stuff. I really actually enjoy that. Lots of people don't, but for me, it's part of, I think, what brings a lot of variety to what I do beyond, just doing a lot of real estate transactions and corporate transactions. So the business side of what I do, I love, and the people side. I deal with a lot of people in a day, as far as clients or realtors or mortgage brokers or lawyers on the other side, or assistants on the other side, or our staff. And the people really make it what keeps you going on it, because you get people that are just so excited and so happy and so grateful and so appreciative, and at times you feel like you really get to help them through, for a lot of people, what is one of the bigger transactions of their life when they buy a house. So that part for sure I like, because it's very collaborative as far as everybody that's on that client's team trying to work together to help them reach a goal.
Awesome.
On the challenging side, so if I was a young person thinking about law, and this is really just my experience, I'm not going to say every lawyer out there is the same, because I'm sure they're not, but for me to get to where I've got as far as building a fairly successful practice over 10 or 12 or 13 years here, it's taken a lot of time, a lot of hours. For me, where that really took me is that I knew I had to find a way to do what I do in a way that I actually really loved it. Because if you spend every minute of every day working and you don't love what you're doing, it's work. Whereas when essentially it's just part of my life. So I get up in the morning, I check my emails, I respond to some stuff on my phone, I take a break and have a hot tub, and then I come back in and I check more emails, and then I hop in the car to drive to Kelowna, and I'll have a couple of phone calls in the morning, or call to check in and see if we're on track for mortgage funds for deals closing and stuff. So there's, I mean, there's certainly different ways of making that work for people. For me, I'm probably on the more extreme end of, in terms of hours that I put in for my career, but it's just been sort of the way I grew up as a lawyer, and it's certainly been for me the reason I can run a busy, successful practice and still be able to make decisions like I'm going to move to Merritt and figure out a way to make it work from there. So definitely the potential downside, and it's not always a downside, but a potential downside is it can take a lot of time, especially in the first few years, to really get your feet under you.
I've definitely heard that a few times from particularly from lawyers about those first few years and how challenging they are.
Well, and I think it's different in that you don't have to put all that time in, but the more time you put in early on when you're trying to learn, just the further ahead you get at a very early stage in your career. So you could put in half the hours, but it would probably take you twice as long to get to a stage in your career where the work's coming in, you're not chasing your next file. You have a pretty good idea of what you're doing on stuff when it comes in, and then you can sort of step back into that role of a professional, which is why we all go to law school and say, okay, now I know the work I want to do, I know the work I like, I know how to do it. Now I actually get to structure that into what I want my life to look like. So for me, that was important to try and push through and get to that stage.
Yeah, well said for sure. Do you have any just really memorable experiences from your career that you're able to share with us?
Early on in my career, when I was still doing a little bit of everything and I was doing some of that litigation work, some of the court appearances that you had to make, while super stressful, it was also pretty cool because you go through law school and you grow up thinking about lawyers and all you hear about are the court applications. So some of those that I did in my early stages, not necessarily because I wanted to, but because I was told I had to do them. As much as you maybe don't like them at the time, are neat experiences to go through just from the general image of what a lawyer does. And then also just on the solicitor side, some of the larger transactions you work on, and you just, if you're a nerd, a law nerd like we are, you get really wrapped up in them and pumped up on them, and you get the adrenaline going, and you're working till 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock every night trying to get everything together and keep all the pieces organized. And often those types of transactions, you're working with another couple of people in your office. So you're spending a lot of time together and everybody's working towards the same goal. And that part of just that sort of that teamwork, some of those deals is, again, stressful, but really exciting when they get to the end and you can take that big breath and say, hey guys, we actually did it. And it was a lot of work, and we can have a little bit of a celebration and maybe take a morning off.
What was your pathway to your current occupation? Like, I think I read through your bio and you actually ended up studying criminology first, right? And then you ended up in law somehow. So just wondering, did you always know that this is what you wanted to do, like when you were in high school?
No, I was probably one of those students in high school that when I hit grade 11, people started saying, so what are you going to do after high school? And I said, I have zero idea what I'm going to do after high school. The only thing I know is I'm going to post-secondary. In my family, that was not really a lot of a choice. My older brother had gone to university. He's 4 years older than me, so he was in UBC doing mining engineering, and I have a twin brother. He was in post-secondary, but for trades. So for me, I was sitting there saying, I kind of have to figure out what I'm going to do, but I know that's the next step. It's just then what am I going to take when I go to post-secondary? So the transition for me was I applied to Kwantlen College and I did a 2-year college program because I really wasn't sure where I wanted to go. When I sat down and pulled out the program and flipped through and started trying to figure out what looked of interest to me, the criminology program, more than anything, just piqued my interest. At that point, I really didn't have a lot of direction. So trying to figure out something that I would actually be interested in and engaged in and be able to actually enjoy what I was doing was really a key for me. So I did 2 years at Kwantlen College, and then it had a bit of a transition into SFU to finish my Bachelor of Arts. So I did that. And when I switched up to SFU, I would have just been in 3rd year, I guess. My older brother was in law school. And he's a high achiever, hard worker, and I like to be the one that said, well, if Paul can do it, so can I. And I really didn't know what else to do with my criminology degree. I debated policing for a little while. I debated social work, but I didn't really have anything that was pulling me really strongly. And I'd also always been a fairly academic student. I enjoyed learning. So for me, I figured I'd go to law school. I didn't know if I necessarily wanted to be a lawyer coming out of it, but just the doors that a program like that would open up for me were interesting. And also having just seen my older brother just finishing up the program probably swayed me to at least do the LSAT and apply and see if I could get in. So
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to Ontario and went to the University of Western Ontario for law school. And then as I got through my 2nd year, my first summer, I actually worked at the university and helped write a couple of articles for a international journal with one of my professors. And then ended up in Kelowna to work for a summer position between 2nd and 3rd year, and then came back there and articled, and the rest is history after that.
Well, just some of the things that you spoke to just twigged another question that's not actually on the script, but I'm sure you can speak to it. If there's a student out there that does think they want to go into law, can you tell us what the process is? Do you actually have to have an undergraduate degree first and then do your LSAT to get in, or are there programs where you can actually go straight into law?
So I have to give you a little caveat on this, as I have not really looked at it a lot in the last few years. When I was in law school in my final year, I actually sat on the admissions committee and reviewed incoming student applications to help make decisions on who to admit and deny. So there, at that point when I was there, almost everybody coming in had a full undergraduate degree. Sometimes law schools at that time would let you in with 2 years, not very often, but sometimes 3 years of an undergraduate degree. But I've always suggested to people, finish that degree. If you're 2 years or 3 years into it, just finish it, because you always then have it in your background. You never go back thinking, oh, I should have just done that one more year, and then I'd have 2 degrees behind my name. But I don't think in the law schools in Canada there's really a way to skip and go straight through from high school. I think they all will require at least a couple of years of a post-secondary degree.
Okay, I'm going to jump around a little bit because that's sort of bringing me to another one of our questions a little bit further down the line. Just bear with me, Dave. What skills, interests, aptitudes, that type of thing would someone need to be successful in law, in your opinion?
Well, I can speak to that on a few pieces. So one is I can speak to that as far as our the staff that we employ and the roles that they have as legal assistants and paralegals and the admin side. And so we usually have a team of, like I said, somewhere between about 10 and 15. And we've learned over time that there's a lot of things you can teach, and there are some things you cannot teach in those roles. And it's somewhat surprising, but we've learned servers are one of our best hires. If you've been in the restaurant industry, you've got customer service skills, you've got prioritization skills and time management skills and communication skills, attention to detail. If somebody says they want their steak rare and you give it to them well done, they're not going to be happy. So those skills have really, on the sort of the legal assistant side of what we hire, have come in really handy, and we've identified that as something we look for in resumes if we're trying to hire somebody in to a legal assistant role. Totally irrelevant to law, but just brings in a really good skill set for what we're looking for. And then on the lawyer side, that's like critical thinking is obviously a key in when you're working through legal problems. And it's critical thinking, but it's also just an interest in actually trying to figure out stuff yourself versus just having answers kind of handed to you, because that's the way that you're going to learn the most, is you spend the time to work through and figure out the answers yourself. You really learn what you're trying to find there, and then you also probably learn a bunch of stuff you weren't even looking for. So just an interest in learning, I think, is really key, not just through the university process and the law school process, but actually just in the practice of law generally.
So true.
I wouldn't mind circling back. Just it again kind of piqued my interest when you mentioned that you had sat on that admissions committee. I'm wondering if you could tell us, are there some things that students that are, either in high school or through their undergrad could be doing to kind of help set them up for success as a law school candidate?
Yeah, when I was there, it was surprising. It was actually a lot less about the subjects that people had taken in their undergraduate degrees. Definitely marks are important. So definitely thinking about taking programs that interest you and you feel like you can do well in is important, because often you get a group of people who are making admissions decisions, and there's so many different university programs out there. Grades are all just kind of, grades are what they are, and you don't necessarily buffer them a lot based on what program they were in. And then extracurricular activities, and I know it, when I was in school, you heard it, you didn't really believe it. You said, well, does it really matter if I sit on yearbook committee or if I get involved in the leadership program? That stuff does matter. I mean, it matters to employers. For us looking at legal assistance, we want to see people that are engaged in the community they're in, whatever that community happens to be. And then also that they've got some initiative and some curiosity and some willingness to learn and take on more and grow and develop. So that type of stuff, just extracurricular activity, teamwork. So team sports always look good on a resume because they show that you know how to work in a group. And then just any of that stuff that you can do outside of your typical, here's what every candidate whose application crosses our desk has all the same stuff on it. How can you differentiate yourself by doing something a little bit different, or finding a way to get back to the community so that you can highlight that on your application, whether it be an application for school or for employment?
As a yearbook advisor, I really appreciate that you mentioned yearbook first, and I hope that everyone sees that. And we didn't plan that ahead of time, so I want people to know that. I couldn't be happier about that comment. In looking ahead in law, where do you see law headed in the future? Big changes or pretty static?
It takes quite a while for the law to change dramatically. We've gone through some changes, and while I've been practicing, we had GST, and then we had HST, and then we had GST, and there's kind of those subtle changes that come over time. They seem pretty dramatic at the time, but as far as kind of big picture structural changes, at least for BC and things like the real estate system, we're pretty far ahead. Our systems are pretty sophisticated. So we're not in a place where we're trying to put those systems into effect like some other provinces are. Just from a legal sort of practical perspective, I'd be surprised to see a lot of change. In the litigation, so the court side of what lawyers do, a big part of what matters to them is judge-made law. So you take a case, you go through court, a judge renders a decision, that decision then stands as a precedent that people will use when they go back to argue similar cases or similar facts. So that stuff obviously takes time because it takes several years to work often a court case through the system. And then people also have to know about that decision to then go rely on it and try and make it sort of more concrete law. But I don't think there'll be a lot of changes. Technology is obviously always going to shake things up. It has in the last year. We've all learned how to do things a little bit differently. But we still write checks, and we send a lot of money out of our firm in a day, and it's all on a check. We don't do much in the way of electronic transfers or wire transfers. So some of those systems I think will be a little bit slower, just from a security perspective. If you're sending, hundreds of millions of dollars around in a year, a check is pretty secure. I know I've signed it. but it's that's where, if anything, I probably see some shift is in terms of the technological side of what we do.
You know, you've spoken quite a bit about this already, but maybe you can maybe match it to like maybe personality types or aptitudes. What other types of career options are there for someone that's going into law? So that you've talked about the two different types, but like say somebody that wants to actually be in the court every day, how would they be different than someone like you?
I know a lot of litigators who do court work, and I think I'm not going to say it's more of a I like to compete sort of attitude, but there's definitely some more of that in what they do. With what they do, there is a winner and there's a loser. If you have the best settlement possible, there's two losers. Nobody's happy. That's the ultimate settlement, is if it's something that nobody's happy with. But I think just a bit of a different approach to sort of wanting to build a case and prove a point versus almost looking at ourselves more as a business ally for people in terms of going through the transaction process. So for my clients that I work with a lot, I want them to think of me as part of their team. That helps them. If they have a question that pops up, just phone me. I'm not going to charge you 0.2 of an hour to answer your phone call and answer a question for you. So sort of the industry has gotten away from that to a certain extent, but it's just, I think, more of a bit of a split between I want to try and prove a point and show that I'm right or my client's right, versus I just want to be involved in the process as far as getting people from point A to point B in terms of a transaction.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And I would say, I'd venture to say that the people that are in the courtroom are probably the ones that are like more the type A. They like to be in the limelight and they like to be out there speaking their voice, whereas maybe the people in your role are more apt to sit back and do the work, but not have to be getting all the glory for everything.
Yeah. I did my few court applications in my first few years, and that was really not, I enjoyed it, not where I see myself long-term, so.
All right, and you've also spoken to this a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the other professions you work closely with?
So on the real estate side, it's the part of the reason I really like real estate is with a real estate file, you get it in, you start it, you do it, you close it, it's done. You actually can get them done in a fairly short turnaround. They're not the same files you're working on for 3 or 4 years. So with that file, you'll also have multiple people involved in it. So at the beginning, you're talking to their realtor, their mortgage broker, their banker, whoever is setting up their financing for them. You'll meet with the clients. You'll have a lawyer on the other side that you're working with, or a notary public, and then their staff as well. So in the real estate, it's usually pretty limited to that. The big other piece of that is dealing with the lenders, because we also do all the mortgage work for, say, Royal Bank's lending money to a client who's buying a house. We act for Royal Bank to help prepare the mortgage documents for that deal as well. But those are a bit more elusive in terms of who you're dealing with, because they often have a funding department that you're working with rather than a specific individual. And then on the corporate commercial side, similarly, I guess we deal with the commercial realtors if you're doing a property purchase or sale or leasing, and we do a lot of work with accountants. So our clients, if they're incorporating or if they're buying or selling a business or doing a restructuring, we're often dealing very closely with their accountants. So they'd be a bit of the key side on the corporate commercial piece.
Couple more questions here for you, Una. Do you, so if I'm someone in grade 11 or 12, I'm watching this and it sounds good to me. Do you have any suggestions of ways that students could explore law in more detail before they, say, make that decision to do a criminology degree or pre-law or something like that?
Yeah, probably the easiest, or I'm not gonna say the easiest, but one of the only ways you really can do that is I am always open to talking to people that are thinking about going to law school. I meet with students or talk to students throughout the year. high school students, university students, law students who want to know what it's like to practice law. So there's certainly lawyers out there. I'm not the only one that are happy to talk to people and give them a bit of an overview on their personal career and the different things they've tried and the types of work they do. So spending some time really exploring those options and talking to people at a big firm in a big city and talking to people who work in a small firm in a smaller city or who work by themselves really gives you some variety as far as what those people do. There's also all types of different careers you can do with law that are not just being a lawyer. Or being a lawyer in the sense that I am. So my sister-in-law is actually a lawyer. She technically lives in Singapore. She has been working in Paris for a couple of years since I've known her. She's been in New York a couple of years since I've known her. And she's an in-house lawyer for a large food company. So she actually works for that company. She has one client who's that entity, multiple entities because it's a very large company. Mm-hmm. And there's roles like that around too on a much smaller scale. And even in Kelowna, there's a couple of companies that have their own lawyer on staff rather than retaining lawyers to do everything on the work they need. They actually have somebody on their staff. So there's not a ton of those jobs around, but there's definitely some where you're still practicing as a lawyer, just not in the same sense that we are going out and dealing with the public as far as giving us work. There's also the education process. So lots of lawyers that go through law school, work for a couple of years, and then end up in universities teaching law. So there's routes to do that, or college teaching legal related courses. So there's the educational side that you can get into. And then also, in my view, just the experience of going through law school is a great education for you, even if you don't even touch law. So if you choose to go into business or finance or something like that, that's somewhat related but different, you still have really useful skills from law school. And the biggest one, coming out of law school, the one thing it really does do is it teaches you how to think through things in a very organized way and very structured way, that you then apply to everything you do in life, whether it's law related or not. So beneficial for lots.
Yeah, and perfect segue into our final question here, which is, do you have any just general career advice for young people in grade 10, 11, 12 that are going to see this as they start to make these big decisions about their career in the future?
I think really it's just taking the time to explore, because as you make decisions, it's going to start you down a path that is probably going to lead you where you see yourself ending up, or possibly where you really don't. So every time you have to make one of those decisions, it's going to give you two options or multiple options, but taking the time to really actually explore what those options are for you and what do they look like as far as impacting your life goals. So if you have specific goals about what you want to do from a family side, or where you want to live, or what your goals are as far as being able to give back to the community, all the decisions you make along the way are going to impact whether or not you can get to those kind of bigger picture goals. And I'm, in hindsight, probably didn't do as much of that sort of exploration piece as I should have. It ended up okay for me, but at some point that probably came just a bit of a lucky thing for me. But I think there's so many share stories and share experiences, and you can really find people that you click with as a mentor, whether they're in an industry you're interested in or not, but you can learn a lot from what they've got to do that exploration, and perhaps get out of your comfort zone and reach out to somebody that you don't necessarily know, or ask somebody you do know that knows them to make a connection. It really can be key to where you end up over the process. I know there's people throughout my career that didn't necessarily have anything directly in line with what I was doing, but I met them at something and had a discussion with them, and you just get the value from everybody else's experiences if you're willing to put the time in to do that. So I should have done more of it when I was going through school and through some decisions about where I wanted to end up as far as careers go. But I figured if my brother did it, then I probably could too. So I followed him, and he was a lawyer for about 2 years before he quit. But now he uses his legal education with some partners to be very heavily involved in the cocktail industry in Singapore. So you never know where your law school programs are going to take you.
Yeah, I really like that idea of, you know, deciding like what kind of lifestyle even you want, and like you said, you know, where you want to live, and you know, it's something to really, I think, consider. There's opportunities in different parts of the world, and even different parts of our province that you know, depending on where you go, it opens up different doors. So we haven't heard that yet from anyone. I thought that was really insightful. I'll open it up. I know we have Keegan here, and Keegan, if you've got any questions, feel free to either jump on and ask, or if you'd love to, you know, pop one into the chat too, I can ask it there. Otherwise, Jennifer, if you have any last minute questions too, then we'll let Una get out of here.
I think she's pretty much covered it for me. I think I'm speechless.
I should add that if you do get students that are watching this, even in the future, if they have an interest in law, I'm one of the lawyers that's happy to talk to people. So if you Google Una Kelowna lawyer, you'll find me. It's not hard. But I'm always open to people reaching out and just kind of picking brains as far as what we do and why we do it and why we love it. And I'm always happy to talk to people.
Yes, and thank you for that offer. I know that there's one person I'm thinking of that I would really like to connect you with in the future here that's interested. With that, Una, thank you so much for jumping on with us tonight and taking us through a bit of your pathway and what you do. I'm really excited for our students to be able to have a look at this and learn a bit from your experiences. So once again, thank you so much.
You're welcome, you guys. Great program.
Thanks, Una. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.